Well, can we begin by thanking Trisha and Brenda and the rest of the crew for leading us today? A couple of housekeeping things I want to get to, and then we will get into wrapping up after this series. For starters, I want us to fast forward 3 months to December and let you know that the most connected people in this community are going to be those that step into one of our nearly 40 groups this week. Like no joke. Someone asked me a moment ago leaving, and you'll hear the message in just a moment, but they asked me a moment ago, like, what do I do when I can't sense God's presence? And one of the first things I said to them is, you need to be around people who can be full of faith when you aren't full of faith. And I don't know what you're going through, but I can promise you this, you and I were never meant to live an isolated life. And here's the deal. We have nearly 40 groups happening 5 days a week. We meet as early as 7:30. I know that's not this crowd. We meet at the night most of the times. There are lunchtime gatherings and all kinds of things like that. 39 groups, 13 neighborhoods, which means you really don't have an excuse. So I know that you're not here all the time, but jump into a group, because when you are here, step into that. And then, so that's December. If you get into a group this week, you go whenever you're in town and are able to go, you're going to be connected to people in our community. And then secondly, a date we've been circling for 4 weeks now is next week, September 16th, we launch our Performer Series, the big fall kickoff series for our church. And here's why we're launching this series. By the way, the tagline of Performer is living for applause and approval. I know that I'm not the only one who struggles with that, but life seems like one performance after another, like we're always being evaluated and given a grade. But what if instead of living for everyone else's approval, what if you and I could figure out a way to live from the approval that comes from the heavens? Like, what if we could live out of that? And what we've been saying is that on the 16th, we're going to invite people to come with us, because we all have people like, one day I'm going to ask them to come with me. And as your church leadership, we try to say one day out there is going to be this day. And for this season, this day is next Sunday, September the 16th. I'm going to give a talk called End the Audition. End the audition. We feel like we're on a stage, and I know I'm physically there right now, but we feel like we're on a stage every hour of our day and every day of our week and every week of our year. And what we want to see is, has God done something in history that puts the audition and makes it over once and for all? And with these invite cards, you have 2 of them in your seat, so it's super easy. We make it rocket science, but it's actually pretty easy to tell somebody, hey, this has transformed my life, being in this community. I would love for you to come with me. This past week, I was going back to my office. My office is in a co-working space just across 3rd Street. And I was going back to my office, and the person next to me, she introduced herself. She said, hey, I'm Paula. I'm new to this office. And I said, I'm Ben. And then she said to me, what business are you a part of? Now, should I tell her the truth? Like, what's she going to do? And I was like, believe it or not, I actually work at a church. And we began to talk about the church, and I began to tell her it was across the street and asked where she lived. She told me Hayes Valley. And you know what? It wasn't so hard to say, here's what we're doing in a couple of weeks. Would you like to come be our guest? So here's the thing I don't want us to do, is to say someone else's no for them. Who are we to think that the God who has transformed our lives can't transform the lives of those people we think, oh, never? So let's make the ask, and I'm committed to do that with you again this week, and I want to invite you to do the same. But today, let's close out the After This series. You guys know that there, for most of us at least, many things in our lives that we enjoy, right? You have a list, I hope, of things in your life that you enjoy. And for most of us, we have numerous possessions, numerous opportunities, numerous experiences, and numerous relationships. But what if we couldn't have numerous things in our lives? Let me ask you the leading question for us today as I get this teaching going. What is the one thing you cannot live without? What is the one thing that you cannot live without? You're like, Ben, that's unfair. One of the great things about life these days for most of us is that we have opportunities and options, and we have lots of them. But what I want to just ask you today to think about is this: what's the one thing that you cannot live without? And a question that goes with it is, what should be true of the one thing that we cannot live without? Let me tell you the list that I came up with. See if you agree. The one thing you and I cannot live without, it should be really valuable. Agreed? The one thing we cannot live without, we should be able to rely on it at all times. The one thing I cannot live without should be able to provide everything that I need in my life. And the one thing I cannot live without should be able to protect me from everything that I don't need in my life. How does that sound? Like, before we even get into the spiritual implications of that, would you guys agree it needs to be valuable? We need to be able to rely on it at all times, whatever we're in the midst of. It needs to provide everything that we need if it's the only thing, right? And it needs to be able to protect us from everything that we do not need. And that's what I want to talk about today. Let's get our hearts and minds around the one thing that we cannot live without, because I'm convinced that if we would really get around this idea that this one thing that we cannot live without would be the thing we pursue most, perhaps, for the rest of our days on this earth. Our text for today is going to come from Psalm 73. You can see all of my notes in the scripture in the app, the Epic app. You can see it in the YouVersion app. You can see it on the screen today, or you just can ignore all of those things and just listen. You don't even have to listen, I guess. Psalm 73, though, if you want to go ahead and open that up, I want to give you some context, then we'll stand and look at 4 verses together. Specifically, we're going to look at the last 4 verses in Psalm 73. Let me give you a little hint of what's going on in that psalm. It's a psalm written by a guy named Asaph. Asaph was the musical director for the worship that took place in the tabernacle. To use modern day language, he was the worship leader there in the tabernacle. He was doing for his people there, for God's people, what Trisha and Brenda and our entire crew were doing for us today, leading them in worship. And when he begins Psalm 73, here's what he says, essentially, like, God, what's up? The wicked have no struggles. They're not bothered by anything because you are still blessing them. And then he says this about himself. He says, I have in vain kept my heart pure. You ever felt that way? Right? Because some of us thought Christianity was a deal-making device with God. And in some ways it is actually God making a deal with us. But have you ever thought that way? Like, I'm going to live the perfect life, God, and you're going to give me blessing because of that? Am I the only one who ever thought that, at least back in the day? And so Asaph says, like, in vain I've kept my heart pure. And then everything turns in verse 17. In verse 17 he says this, till I entered the sanctuary. Till I entered the sanctuary. The reason why I pray all week long that God's presence would fill all 11,000 square feet in our space here at Epic is because when we enter his presence, everything begins to shift, right? And if we don't enter his presence, all we're left with is what the world wants to teach us and the common sense that we think we're awesome at. But he says, I was thinking this, I was upset, I thought I had wasted my life, and then I entered the sanctuary. And there, everything changes. There, Asaph begins to understand or maybe remind himself of the one thing he actually cannot live without. What's your thing? What's your thing? What's your thing? I want you to stand as I read the last 4 verses of Psalm 73. And now that you know that this psalm did not begin with him thinking that life would be awesome, and it begins with him really going like, God, there's a problem here. There's something that's off. The evil people are prospering. I am struggling, and I've done everything by the book till I entered the sanctuary. And as he enters the presence of God, his priorities begin to shift. His worship begins to shift. His assessment about what he needs most begins to shift. And I pray the same will be true for you. 4 verses only. That does not mean it's a short sermon. 25. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. You may be seated. We're going to wade through every piece of this because it's true for the whole of Scripture, but there are no wasted words in these 4 verses. There's nothing to dismiss and get on to the better thing. It is all pretty amazing. And what I want to say to you, wherever you are in your own faith journey, wherever you're looking to and saying, I cannot live without that, I want to urge you towards something. I want to urge you to ultimately pursue something or someone that can hold the full weight of your desires. I want you to pursue ultimately something or someone that can actually hold the full weight of your desire, someone who is steadfast, someone you can depend on regardless of what you find yourselves in the midst of, someone that is able to see you through the best of times and is still present and seeing you through your worst seasons in life. I want you to pursue ultimately someone who doesn't fluctuate like your health is going to fluctuate, someone who doesn't fluctuate like the stock market's going to fluctuate, and someone who doesn't fluctuate like our emotions fluctuate. And Asaph is essentially telling us today, I have found that someone. And for him, right, because he's the worship leader, it probably means he has found that someone again. He had to get out of his own head. Anybody else knows that you have hope if you can just get out of your own head? But the hardest thing to do in life is to get out of your own head. And he's like, oh, this is unfair, till I entered the sanctuary. And then he begins to say things like, I have found that someone. I've found that someone. And he goes on to say that my flesh and my heart may fail, but before he gets there, he's like, there's nothing I desire besides you. Like, I don't know about you, but when he says there's nothing on earth I desire besides you, I don't know about you, but there are lots of things on earth I desire. Anybody else? I desire the sunshine. Anybody? Like, God heard my prayer. I was like, God, it has been 90 days of no sun. If you don't bring the sun out yesterday, I've been called to somewhere else in the Bay Area. This week, I spent 2 afternoon and evenings in Palo Alto, and then yesterday I was over in the East Bay in Benicia, and I was like, oh my gosh, Shauna, should we? And then God brought the sunshine. He's like, there you go, Ben. I'm like, all right, I guess 4 hours of sunshine, still with 20-mile-an-hour winds is okay. But I desire sunshine, and I've been told it's out today. It was out actually when I came to church today. Is it still out? It's a fickle thing these days. And I desire sunshine. I desire Phil's coffee. And just so you know, right now I'm rocking Filtered Soul, Phil's Way, medium cream, medium sugar. And you're like, don't all of you elitists. I drink it black when I'm at home, but it Phil's, I'm like, give me some of that. And you need to know that when it comes to any good content that you have heard from me over the last month, that you're going to hear over the next month, it all is due to 2 things, the Holy Spirit and Phil's. I've seen some of you and had the chance to buy you coffee over the last few weeks. So that's where I'm at. That's just where the ideas are flowing. Wednesday mornings for sure. Sometimes Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday mornings from about 8:30 to 11 or so. You can find me at the Phil's on 4th and Berry because that's where it's all coming. If you don't see me there, it just means that place dried up and I'm on the hunt for something else. I desire Phil's coffee. I desire to do well at my job. I desire to travel the globe and see unique places. I desire to cheer on my kids. I desire to take walks around the city. I desire my wife. There are all kinds of things I desire. Certainly, he doesn't mean that we can have no desires besides God. What does he mean then? I think what he must mean is that when it comes to your desires, you should desire nothing like you desire God because there is nothing that can do for you what God alone can do for you. That's what he's saying. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity is writing about this idea. He's writing about basically the idea of our message today, and he's saying to his readers, like, it's not going to do you any good to say that you can't live without something that you actually can live without. Here's what he says. He said, the reason why it can never succeed is this. God made us, invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, and it would not run properly on anything else. Now, God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel our spirits were designed to feed on. There is no other. Listen to this. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering with religion. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself because it is not there. There is no such thing. I love that. Because it resonates with me because I've tried other things. Anybody else? I'm like, maybe my life could run on love. Maybe my life could run on success. Maybe my life could run on raising great kids, right? But the reality is those things still leave me with this depth of emptiness. And so I've got to keep pressing on. And wherever you are in your journey today, I just want to say press on because if you haven't found God, I know you haven't found it yet. And you may say to me, Ben, I'm in a really great season right now. I want to tell you that season will come to a close. It always does. And I love what Lewis says about that. When Asaph goes on in 26, he says, my flesh and my heart may fail. He's saying, I thought what I needed most and couldn't live without was like really great earthly blessings. But one day, even my own body, my own health is going to fall apart. Anybody felt that lately besides me? Like, you guys need to know, I'm the guy that never goes to the doctor. And you're thinking, Ben, we have doctors in our church, you should apologize. No, I just text them, here's my conditions. WebMD tells me I'm gonna die, but what do you say? And I don't go to the doctor unless I have to have a physical. In 2011, when we launched the church, the only reason I started getting annual physicals is because Shauna literally told me, I will not show up to the launch service if you don't get a physical. I'm like, well, you need to be at church. That would look awkward, the pastor's wife, not at church for the first Sunday. And so I did, but I really never go to the doctor. But I have 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and I've got 6 appointments in the next 6 weeks. Like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? What's wrong is that apparently I have micro tears in my rotator cuff. So 8 o'clock Thursday, I had an ultrasound done, and the only ultrasound I've ever seen in my life, truth be told, the 3 boys that Shauna was pregnant with at the time, our 3 sons, is the only, like, and on this one, I'm like, I don't know what that is. That's a bunch of white and black. What's going on? And of course, he's like, let me impress you. I'm like, okay. He's like, the black space right there, that is inflammation. That's bursitis. Like, all right, that doesn't sound good. And then he's like, see this over here? That's a little bit of arthritis. I'm like, what did you say? To which he says to me, that's okay. It's fairly common in men your age. Inside, I'm like Asaph. I'm like, God, I'm down to my high school weight. God, I'm just trying to play baseball with my boys and invest in their lives. What's wrong? And I had friends who, I needed some sympathy. And because I hadn't taken the story too public, I was like, okay, we got to break out Instagram. Somebody needs to know I'm in trouble. And so I did that. And then I got messages from 2 people, and they essentially said to me, Ben, when did this happen? Like, we didn't know. I wrote back, the last 41 years of my life. Our bodies are going to fail, right? Like, even those of us in the very best shape, they're not going to be there forever. Your ability to work like you're working and killing it today, that's going to end one day, right? Your marriages, all of our marriages are going to end one day. Our success in life, it's going to end one day. And one day, these hearts that are beating, the breath that's coming out of our lungs, one day we will take our last breath. And so he says, my heart and my flesh, they may fail, but God. You need to know that when you see it, either literally see these 2 words together, or you just realize that's the moment happening in your life. The most beautiful words sometimes we could ever have about our lives is the but God phrase. Like, I was this, but God, right? I mean, this is the gospel message of Jesus. I was dead, but God made me alive in Christ Jesus. And Asaph says, my flesh and my heart, they may go away one day, but you are my strength, God. But God is my strength, and he's my portion. So when everything else goes away, he's not going away. A moment ago, we sang the last song before I got up to speak had a line in it, you're never going to let me down. For those of you who don't come for the music, that's what it said. And it was great music, by the way. You're never going to let me down. And here's what I want to say to you. Like, whatever the thing is in your life that you're looking to this morning and saying, I cannot live without it, you better be able to sing that line to that song about it. Whatever it is for you, if you cannot sing, you're never going to let me down, then choose a different thing. So can you sing that to your career? Can you sing that to your startup? Can you sing that to your kids when they get into the school of your choice? Most cities, we would be talking about university because that's when you really start thinking about getting into the school of your choice. But no, I know how it works for you in San Francisco. You feel prideful because your 3-year-old killed the interview at preschool. And we're proud of you and her, right? But we set ourselves up and go, if I get this, then I'm going to have everything that I need. And I want to say, whatever the thing is for you, can you say to it, you are never going to let me down? If not, my advice, not as a pastor, but just as someone coming along with a little bit of wisdom saying to you, then choose another thing. Choose something else. Choose something else. Asaph goes on to contrast what happens with people who are near God and what happens with people who are far from God. And he says something in this psalm that you might find disconcerting. It might make you angry. You might even say, Ben, if God's like this, I don't want to believe in God. Here's what he says. Those far from you will what? Perish. Those far from you will perish. And we go, oh, there's no way a good and loving God could do that. Let me help you think about it in a different way that's been really helpful for me. We believe that God is the source of life, okay? Those far from God are far from what? Come on. Right? Does that make sense? We're tracking. If God is the ultimate source of life, John, the gospel writer, says, in him, Jesus was life, and that life was the light of men. If God is the source of life and you're far from God, that means you're far from life. If you don't have life, what do you have? This is the thought that blew my mind this week. God is the source of life. If you want to live your life far from God, then you're going to live it far from the source of life. If you do not have life, you perish. But he contrasts that in verse 28. He says, but for me, it's good to be near God. Even if God isn't giving me the blessing that I want on this earth, it is good for me to be near God. I want to live right here. I've been there before, and I know they're being blessed right now, but ultimately they're going to miss out on life, and I don't want to miss out on life. It's good for me to be near God. My father, I'm so grateful to tell you that my father has prayed for me my entire life and still does so. And obviously, I haven't heard most of the prayers that he has prayed for me, and I've forgotten the ones that I did hear mostly. But there was a line, usually in my dad's prayers, I began to think about this idea in verse 28 of being near God that just kept reverberating and echoing in my heart and my mind this week. Here's how my dad would end a lot of his prayers for me. Here's what he would say. He would say, and Father, keep Benjamin close to you in all that he does. I don't know that I valued or appreciated that prayer back then. It's like, this is it, isn't it? Some of you are like, no, Ben, I need to get the funding. No, my kids need to be perfect. No, I need to have someone who will say yes to marrying me. And those things are all great, but what you need is to live a life that's marked by the nearness of God. Because those who far perish, it's good for me. This is what I want. Not only did my dad want for me, I want it for my wife and our marriage. I want it for our kids that we're raising. I want it for our staff team here at Epic. I want it for our leadership. And I want it for this entire church. And I want it for the city. And I want it for the world. This is why we're doing what we're doing. The reason we started this church isn't just so a few of us Christians would have a place to hang out in a really cool city beneath the CVS. The reason we started this church is because we thought God was asking us to bring him near a community of people. And we're giving our life to that. It's good for me to be near God. It's good for me to be near God. The active presence of God in our lives can do what everything else combined will never be able to do for us. Whatever you're looking to and saying, I can't live without that, I want to tell you this. The active presence of God in your life will do for you what all of the other things you're looking to today will not be able to do if you added them all up. This past Tuesday morning, 10:30, I led our staff team through a teaching on 2 Corinthians chapter 6. And Paul's writing to the church at Corinth, and he's talking about basically what was missing in his life and what was present. So one example, he says, I was sorrowful yet full of joy. That's, by the way, when you know you have a true faith. Anybody know that? Is there, like, if you want to test your faith, ask yourself, is something present when the things I wish were present are not present? That's how you can, like, if you want to just a faith check this morning. Because when my life is awesome, my faith is awesome. Anybody else? But here's what he says, a phrase he says in verse 10. I'm just going to put the phrase on the screen. You can check out the rest of the text later. He says this. He says, having nothing and yet possessing everything. What is he saying? He's saying all the things we think we have to live, we really didn't have any of that. But the thing that we had was the thing we cannot live without. See, my fear is in the middle of San Francisco that for so many of us, we seemingly have everything, but we have nothing of substance. When we were moving to plant this church, and I talked to someone who was familiar not only with the city, but familiar with our neighborhood, and they said to me, Ben, the hardest thing about starting a church in that neighborhood is that people are inoculated from real need. They think they've been able to buy and achieve their way to everything that they could ever need. But the reality is, at some point in time, even the most successful people experience an emptiness. Right? Even the best marriages fall apart. Even those that have been serial entrepreneurs, they don't always win. And so can the thing you say, I have to have that more than anything else, can it do for you what you're asking it to do for you? He says that God is going to destroy all of those who are unfaithful to him. To be unfaithful to God means that you've chosen something or someone above and over God. Like, to think about marriage, it will help us see this idea. If someone is unfaithful in their marriage, it means they've chosen someone or something over their spouse. Everybody understand that? Unfaithfulness to God is choosing something or someone that's more important than God. This is why the first of the 10 commandments is this, Exodus 20, 1 through 3. And God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me, because there are no other gods before him. Now, there's a reason why this is the first commandment if you don't know that. The reason why this is first, the reason why you and I should consider this to be the first imperative from God, A, is because it is. B, is as this one goes, so goes everything else. As we get this one right and lived out, so does everything else get lived out. If we get this one wrong, then everything else is going to be out of order. If we get this one right, then perhaps everything else can be rightly ordered in our lives. Anything that we put above God is what the scripture calls an idol. An idol. This past week, I had a chance to be in the room a couple of nights with Tim Keller, a guy that we've learned a lot from. Because I'm going to talk about idols, he's not my idol. He's my mentor from afar, okay? Not my idol. And I got a chance to be in a room with him a couple times this week on Wednesday and Thursday night, and it was incredible just to be there. But he's taught me a lot about this concept in his book, Counterfeit Gods. If you've never read it, it's a pretty short read, but it will impact you, I think, at least it has me in a deep way. And here are 2 quotes from him in that book about idols. He says, what is an idol? It is anything more important to you than God. Anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God. Anything you seek to give you what only God can give. Goes on. God was saying that the human heart takes good things like a successful career, love, material possessions, even family, and turns them into ultimate things. Our hearts deify them as the center of our lives because we think they can give us significance and security, safety and fulfillment if we attain them. So when it comes to the idols in my life and your life, one way is to ask yourself, what do you worship? Another way to discern your idols is to ask yourself, where do you find security? Is it in your job? Is it in a relationship? Is it your 401k? Is it the fact that you are one of the few who owns a home here? Like, what is it that you find your security in? Because it really matters where you and I find our security. Asaph wraps up this psalm by saying, I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. The word refuge literally means shelter or protection from danger. And he's saying, I'm not going to find my security even in the things I want this God to bless me with. I'm not going to find my security in you punishing the evil men and women in this community. I'm going to find my security in you. You are my refuge. And then he wraps it up by saying, I will tell of all your deeds. This is why we've been circling next Sunday, is because we want to be the kind of people who don't allow God just to transform us and keep it to ourselves. We want to invite people into that transformative presence of God. And to those of us who think, well, yeah, it worked for me, but I'm not sure it would work for them, who are you? And who are they? The miracle of God changing my life and your life is the same miracle that will take to change their lives, and it's available. Now, when you think about this issue of idols, idols are everywhere in the world. Have you ever been to a place where they have physical idols? Anybody ever been to a country? Just hold your hands up high. Like, you've been to, awesome. And so you like literally seen the kind of idols that are talked about in the scriptures. But idols are prevalent today, and they're prevalent in San Francisco, right? The idols that are prevalent here, success, pleasure, political views, the self, I think, is the biggest idol there's ever been in the world, and that's the biggest idol in our city, and it's the biggest idol in my heart and in yours, the self. In The Pursuit of God, A.W. Tozer, that book we've been looking at over this series, he says if you begin to really worship God, not just in an hour on Sundays, but it becomes the lifeblood of your life, he says you will stand out in this world. Here's what he says. He says, the moment we make up our minds that we are going on with this determination to exalt God over all, we step out of the world's parade. Now, I want to say something, and I want to say it as gently as I can because there's weight behind the words I want to say. If there are things in our lives, habitually, consistently, all of our lives, that we put over God, I think I would be doing you a disservice to allow you to assume you could be a Christian and that be true. Because from front to back, the story is Christians are people who've exchanged their old life for a new life, their old God for a new God. Now, this doesn't mean that any of us get this perfect. But if that exchange has never taken place, and maybe you're like, Ben, I don't even want to assume I'm a Christian. That's good. I wouldn't. but we're thrilled that you're here. And that exchange that I just mentioned, it can take place today. Here's my very favorite one-verse parable that talks about the great exchange in terms of what we're saying today. It's in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Isn't that everything we're talking about today? He finally came face to face with the thing he could not live without. And what did he do? He didn't just do something spiritual. He did what all of us have done. When you and I find the thing we can't live without, we'll trade everything to have it. Or just me. When Shauna and I started dating, I was doing an internship at a hospital and not getting paid a penny for it. But you'll do whatever it takes to get what you want. With me? And they thought a college student without a job would be a great candidate for a credit card. And some of you are like, "Ben, are you still paying that off?" No, like 2 years ago. No, I'm kidding. And it's like, this is our first date. I don't care what I have to do. I don't care about 15%. Like, I'm just, right? Minnie's dying, our financial genius. Minnie, I no longer have those habits. We're going on our first date. Like, I don't know what we did for our second date, but for our first date, I'm going to do whatever I have to do. And I was thrilled, to be honest, when I ordered the filet and Shauna went with the Savannah Club sandwich. I was like, yes, I can pay that $7 sandwich off and my $21 filet. My whole point is that sometimes you hear a message like this and you're like, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready to do that spiritual thing." But here's what I'm going to tell every person in the room, every person. You're already doing this. You're already doing it. You're already saying to one thing, "This is what I have to have most," and you're saying to everything else, "I will trade you in to get that, and I will trade you in to do that, and if I have to lay down this, I'll lay it down because this is what I have to have most." I mean, the whole reality of Christianity is about an exchange, isn't it? On the cross, Jesus does what exchange? He gives his righteousness away and takes on our sin and the payment for that sin. What do we get? We get to exchange our sin and its judgment for his righteousness, and God looks at us as though we're Jesus. Is that an exchange you need to make? Now, some of you, if I asked you that question, we're sitting one-on-one, I know you're in this community. I know some of you are in this room right now. You would say, "Ben, I've done the church thing. Bringing my kids to church, we pray before we eat." I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you, has that exchange ever taken place in your life? The next 2 weeks, we will do baptisms right over here in this corner for 2 friends of mine, which is going to be amazing. And we're going to declare that exchange. We're going to give you a picture. But I think perhaps some of you, you've made that exchange in your heart. It's time to let the world know. You can open, all that's on the app. You can't order food on the app, but everything else you want to do, it can be done on the app. You see, baptism is an exchange, isn't it? When you're lowered into the water, you're giving up your old life. When you're raised, you have this new life in Christ. It's all about the exchange. What exchanges need to be made in your heart, your mind, and your life today? What are you looking to and saying, "If I get it, I'm good"? Some of you look to something, you got it, everything you dreamt about, and it's no longer working for you. Your temptation is to move on to something else. And I think that's a good temptation. If you move on to that thing or that someone to which you can say and sing, "You're never going to let me down." I want to pray for you. I want to ask you to take a posture of prayer this morning. If that's closing your eyes while the lights come down, if that is just hands open, if it's sitting there silently, whatever that might be. What is it you can't live without? My hope has been that as we stepped into God's presence today, that we would see clearly like Asaph saw clearly. And just so you know, like making that exchange today, it's going to come do battle with you tomorrow too. You're going to wake up tomorrow and there's going to be something there. And I just want to encourage you, if you've never become a Christian, or at least you realize today, like I've never said, "God, you are better and you're over and you're above all of the things that I've said I can't live without. And God, you are who I need most. God, you're what I need most. God, you being near me is better than all of the things I thought I used to need combined." God, would you help us to see clearly? Would you give us the courage to step away from whatever we need to step away from? God, most things in our lives, it's just that they don't need to leave. They just need to be dethroned. God, would you give us that ability? Could we live with the posture that there are no other gods in my life before you or above you? God, you are steady. You're deeply satisfying. It's good for me to be near. God, I will perish without you. God, could we even say when we kind of lose everything, could we say with Paul, like having nothing and yet possessing everything? As you guys are praying, I just want to give you that word again. He's just going like, whom have I in heaven but you? And the earth has nothing I desire besides you. He says, my flesh and my heart may fail, but you're the strength of my heart, and you're my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it's good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds. Where are you finding your security, your hope, your worship? Anybody need to shift what they think they cannot live without today? I'm going to ask you to stand as these ladies lead us to really get back to the heart of the matter. Let's stand.